reality, so the first panel we talked about, we were focused on the inherent idea of individualism inherent in the hero's journey, right? And especially in the origin. And we sort of took that, and with Blue Beetle, we kind of explored a multiple origin, right? An origin that is not one person's origin story, but a community's origin story, right? And so we tried to push back against that notion of individualism that just kind of perniciously sneaks into when we're doing this kind of exercise. We want to tell a story, we want to do something. We want to do, narrative building work. You hear that all the time. And I think what we have all talked about over time is that, I'm going to have you turn a little bit so people can see, is that in the second part of the hero's journey, when you look at the educator, the mentor, this meeting with the sage, or meeting with the person who has knowledge to impart, Yoda or whatever, is sort of the baked-in piece of paternalism that comes with that, right? And so some of the consequences that flow from that, and also some of the ways where Miles Morales really provides us with an opportunity to look at an ecosystem, right? A hero's journey that really moves through an ecosystem of support and moves with an ecosystem, and how that gives us and gives him more power in a way that somebody like Superman doesn't necessarily need until he needs it, right? You get it in the Justice League, you get it later, but it's not part of their origin story. It's like when we want to extend the superhero universe, we bring it in, but not until then, So before I get too far along, I'd love to introduce you all know him, you know Awesome, but I'd love to introduce Robert. Robert, it's a pleasure to have you here. Let me just, so I was reading your bio, right? And you talk about underneath, because you do a lot of work in knowledge management, data science, right? You've done research in New York City schools, right? You've done research at Rikers Island, I believe, too, right? But you say underneath it all, you're an educator, right? Educator, and can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Sure, no problem. Wow. All right, the mic is on. So my name is Robert Avim Jackson III. Very similar, but different Spider-Verses of legacy and origin. And so I bring that in because, my first education was by my family members. It taught me the rules of engagement of being a black boy and in certain rooms, in different rooms. And so when I had the opportunity to travel the world with my church, travel my own local environment with different mentors and social workers supporting me in my journey through navigating PWIs at a very young age, I recognized that the phrase "each one teach one" was a verb and not just a phrase that you just heard old folks saying, right? So I've always prided myself on holding the old school ways while hanging out with people my own age or younger. And so I started educating formally in 2010, going into Southeast Anacostia, D.C., from Georgetown in Northwest D.C., wondering why I had the opportunity to go to my dream school and why so many folks who look not just like me, but were my kin, in my mind, couldn't even get off the block. And I knew that wasn't about education from the standpoints of reading a bunch of books in the scholastics program. I knew that was about having somebody hold their hand and hold their shoulder and hold them up. So education started for me as an after-school program with 75 other volunteers where we went to Anacostia, D.C. from Georgetown University every day to support young people, not necessarily in their math and English, but on their emotion and trust and finding guidance throughout the day. So when I say I'm an educator, it was always about the pieces I took from my own home because that's what helped me survive. So it was always survival education that turned into thrival education, and really that being about relationship building.
Thank you for that. And, I think we were talking about with Miles Morales, this is the second movie, right? Across the Spider-Verse, he's getting comfortable being a superhero, right? So in the first movie, we sort of asked who gets to be the superhero, right? We've kind of gone past that. And in the second, we start to learn a little bit more about what does that mean, right? What does it mean to be a superhero? How is he going to show up in a room where basically everybody's just copied pasted. They have different slight permutations, but they're all Spider-Men. Like, how does his story different, And so what I'd love to ask you, Asam, is that when we're talking about, this kind of relates to, it's like the extension of the conversation we had about an hour ago, right? Because where we started was a multiple hero's journey, right? A journey that is a multiple co-powering initiation, right? And now I want to talk about the difference between Miles Morales and Peter Parker, right? Because there's a reason Miles Morales has special resonance, right? He has different history, different, and so I'd love to be able to hear from you kind of how you, as you've watched the movies, think about the parallels between that, right? Between those two, and so really, really critically where they diverge in their approach to superhero-dom. And Robert, I'll let you come in too, because I know you have a lot of thoughts about that. And again, we'll talk about what that means for our work in a second, but I'd like to just get the grounding in the superhero stuff, and then we'll talk about the others.
Yeah, it's yeah. When I think about the Miles Morales, I think that when I juxtaposition that against what we know as Peter Parker and what's been put out in comic books, what's the distinction is not outside of ethnicity, skin color, the culture and tradition that comes. It's the fact that this is a normal person, didn't lose mother, father, doesn't have this ache that is constantly born of pain and hardship. And also the community. Yeah, there's a community. We always, in the professional world, you say community of practice. And in his time, he gets to evolve and grow up, but he also has the benefit of a emergent community of practice of his own that he can see himself in.
Almost like a chosen family in that way, of the Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think a lot about, I've deeply identified with Across the Spider-Verse to the point of tears, and I saw it twice, once with my father, another time with a significant other, and I was still there by myself both times, really identifying with Miles Morales' responsibility to isolation and his responsibility to the siloed life he had in the beginning of the film, right? Where he's like, where did all my friends go from the last movie? I'm just here trying to figure out what college to go to. I just want to go to Princeton. I miss my, not real girlfriend. To being immersed and almost saturated in the Spider-Man identity that essentially was his quote-unquote scholarship, right? Into a society that almost begged him to choose trauma and isolation as his narrative. And so, I think about the difference between Peter Parker and Miles. Like, Peter told himself he didn't have a choice, in that he told himself that Uncle Ben's story, I'm sorry, I'm going out of the movie, but Uncle Ben was Peter Parker's father figure in a lot of the lore, and Uncle Ben was slain as relatively closely to when Peter got his powers as Spider-Man. And as a teenager, when this happens, your mind is, like any trauma as a teenager, you're going to create associations with your reality and your own actions. And I think, again, now I'm identifying with Peter, but in the idea of the difference, Peter took that experience and incidentally built his reality around trauma and avoiding trauma for others while calling himself friendly. Whereas Miles Morales, I can't recall a deep trauma that occurred in the first film, but he really was just built around the reality of discovery. And when he was pulled into the Spider Society, they tried to almost engineer a traumatic experience for him to be pulled into the fold. And so I think that is the major difference for me, is one person's introspection an inability to see his community broader than his own lived experience, and another who, because of the abundance of his reality, I mean, how many times did we see those scenes where Miles Morales is webbing up through an apartment building? Those are very intentional scenes to show you the movement from changing out of this mask and into this hoodie and this other reality, and doing it in seconds. When we talk about code switching, when we talk about the way we move through rooms and sliding door moments. We talk about the veil. And in some sense, Miles Morales is losing his veil when he's going on the rooftop and bringing the cake and celebrating his father and his mother's accomplishments. That's the superhero story, is his family has built a community in this building that sustains him, that Gwen comes to find him at. that he returns to at the end of the film, spoiler alert, in the wrong universe, he still returns to the same building and structure that the mural of his deceased father is on. So even across the universe, the community is still the center for Miles Morales, even in tragedy. And for Peter, he claims to be about the community, the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but he's never in Queens. That's my thought.
Oh, thank you. And I wanted to. I think there was once. He went once. He might have gone once. Well, but I think that what I wanted to talk about too, and again, translating, moving from the movie to talking about the work, right? And talking about some of this idea that as you progress in the work, and Awesome, you kind of have alluded to this different times, that people are going to try to put you or encourage you to take up a mantle. That's how things work, right? It's like in the Spider-Verse, like it's like he has to lose somebody significant. Yeah. And again, we talk about, this came out of a conversation of like a lot of the deficit-based framing that we are asked to present and asked to lead with, whether, not just to get funding, because I come from a PR background, to get attention in the media, right? To get attention from and sympathy from other people, right? That's the question, that's the default. And that's what as we go deeper into the work, that like we are constantly in places where we have, and again, it's not always the people who are unknown to us. Miguel, who is the Deuter antagonist or whatever. Like he's like the secondary, he's putatively an ally, right? He's putatively somebody who's in the work, right? Yep. And he is asking them and making that assumption. So he has the narrative in his mind, right, from his own lived experience, that that's what has to happen. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you've experienced that. Again, we don't need to use names, but how you've experienced that in the work, and how you keep coming back from that, right? How do you not just come at that with like let's fight about it, right? Yeah. But also with compassion, with understanding that Miguel has a lot of heartache in his story too.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think that there's some complexity there. Someone was making a joke at a table, and he said, "Austin, share your pain with me. It runs deep." And I was like, ugh.
Who said that?
He was making it as, come on, open up, talk. And I was like, does it have to be about the pain? It was a good day. The sun is shining, the sky is blue. But I think what we have done, to your point, is in the work, in the way that we have been framed, in the way that the African-American story and cultural, if you came over, to the U.S. I don't care if you were Irish, it's always the hardship, the voyage. You pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We sacrificed, we suffered. In our case, we were brought, in reality, contrary to what Kanye may believe, it was not a cruise ship that brought us over here. Shots fired. But the reality is that then that becomes part of the traumatic experience that gets ingrained in the narrative, and it almost impedes you. And everyone needs that as a relationship point. And so to your point, the PR, I was surprised when I learned that Toni Braxton was designed to sell sad songs. It's like, oh, wow, that's what Adele does today. No, shots fired.
I didn't know that till you just said
that. Yeah, they actually said that, when she wanted to break the mold of her narrative, they kept reminding her, you sell sad songs,
I'm upset.
Sorry, yeah. Disappointing. And that becomes part of the emotional trigger, right? And that's the hook, and that's how we get taught to relate to one another. And we ask how the day is, and it's like, I have to pick between saying it's a good day or is it a bad day? And so in our work, in the narratives, when people ask the reason why, data for public good or AI isn't taking traction is because there's no shared pain point. That's what they want, a shared pain point. So when all women couldn't vote, you had a shared pain point. When all of us couldn't vote, we had a shared pain point. Now that is fragmented. And so everyone wants to create, where can you get that human connection? And it's usually in a shared pain point. What's that point of entry? How'd you get here? Story. So I think that it's the way that we've been cultivated in this culture from a PR standpoint, from a funding standpoint. Can you make your case? We used to call it the pain Olympics. How fast can you get to the bottom? I hurt more than you hurt. Our culture had a war and we got forced over here. What about yours? Oh, I was exported. Oh, no, I was imported. We keep racing down and we don't know how to race up.
So, and I also, when we were talking about the nihilism, right? You were talking about you reminded me of the framing.
Yeah, the responsibility of us to hold the narrative of nihilism, Afrofuturism, and then Afro-pessimism, right?
Thank
And
you.
so
That was the term.
Afro-pessimism being, sorry, you go ahead.
No, you.
Yeah, just the idea of Afro-pessimism and Tallahassee Coates being my proxy for that. The idea of telling the story of blackness through the protection of your son in Between the World and Me, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful text that connected me to my father in ways that probably would never show up in conversation, but it was pessimistic. It wasn't a journey of optimism, which is what him and I shared through our love of comic books, which is like how we first spoke our love language to each other when he started raising me at 8 by himself. He opened up a giant trunk of comic books, and I started to see all the color of his life come to life. And this man was in the Navy, so it was always blue, white, and gray until he opened that trunk, and I started to see how much color lived inside of him. So, I mean, that's the Afrofuturist. That's that side. The Tallahassee Codes taught me about the pessimism we all have to hold as black men for other black boys in our black community and black women. Shout out to the women from yesterday. But then there's also that other perspective, the nihilism, which is 50 years of hip hop at the very least.
So I want to focus on the pessimism too, because I think, and again, if you were in Walter's workshop earlier, you talked about the truth of that too. So we're not saying that that's not true, and I think that like this is an exercise, right? This idea of like writing the narrative is an exercise in making choices, right? Strategic choices about why are you telling the story, right? What does it do? What does it allow you to do? In the same way, like what does the mask? What does the mask allow Peter Parker to do? What does it allow Miles Morales to do? But also, what does it prevent them from doing? You were saying like sometimes it's like the real superhero moments are happening without the mask. The real moments of like the real, as Dr. Grayson talked about, the real miracles are happening. Sometimes not in that context of these feats of Olympian strength. But so before, I want to talk about the mentor again, because I want to talk about how we engage other people in the work, how we build trust, right? What kind of lessons we can pick from that. But before we get to that, you talked about rejecting that choice, rejecting the choices of pain, right? Pain is like the connector, right? And I want to know, you start with Miles Morales, start with your own story, but how have you done that, right? How does that happen? Like, I know it takes trust, but I'd like to hear a little more about how do you make that choice, right? And pick a new narrative, right, to really lean into.
This may sound odd, but I didn't realize it until you were asking me. Sometimes I honestly, I think just like in the movie, you sometimes just have to state it directly. That's not the direction. That's not what we're going to talk about. That's not the way we approach it. Sometimes you have to say, this is the thought leadership that how we align, and this is how we grow. You have to experiment. I do believe, and we say it's at TCIA within our team, being smart makes you dumb. You know, because smart is a mass. Your innate intelligence wants to experiment, and it doesn't mind failing. It doesn't mind sampling something to figure out if it tastes good. Your smarts, however, I have you sit there like, I don't eat that. And most of us get used to wearing that mask as if it protects us from the fear of failing, the fear of taking a risk or being seen as, and whatever that as is. And that the notions that we have to get from behind that type of conversation, because we're not really connecting with people. You're connecting with a mask, and if that person's mask slip or they move it, then you don't have a relationship anymore. And so I think that the authenticness of, even though it's a movie, you have to appreciate to what Robin said, that the reality is that the superhero part is being human and connected for real, not in that. So you have to sometimes state it clearly what your intent is in the conversation. What is it that you're seeking to co-power, and accepting that everyone isn't there. That's the key part. If you get frustrated at someone for not being there, then you just took on the problem.
So you talked about that threefold definition of co-powering, right? Honoring the past, anchored in the present, and really acknowledging the reality of the present as it is now, and then with momentum towards the future. And what I heard in that was two things: the idea of opening that moment of vulnerability making a decision to have that moment of vulnerability, like you said, and say it as it is, which takes trust, right? Which takes trust. And you were talking about, and I think you talked about in in Across the Spider-Verse, it's sort of it's sort of a slow motion betrayal in some ways, right? Miguel's plan is to require. Basically, he's a compliance guy. Basically, he wants Spider-Man to comply with the narrative of you need to lose somebody close to you, right? And so how do you, because I'm sure you've experienced, and we've all experienced those things where we are with somebody, we are in community with somebody, we share a lot of them, we wear the same mask, right? But we are not doing the same work, right? We're not driving towards that same horizon, you know?
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
It's not that we're not driving to the same horizon. It looks like we're doing the same work. It looks like we're doing the same work. And then you can't figure out why aren't we getting the same outcomes though? Where's that deviation? Does that make sense? Because you don't see it at first. You think that, oh yeah, we're co-powering this together. And then you have to figure out, but why every time I let go of the steering wheel, we wind up way over here? And so you don't really see it all the time. It's more covert. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that's why we talk about it being slow motion. He's welcomed into. He wants this. He wants this community. So I wanted to hear about from you, knowing that, like, again, there's an amount of courage too, right, in being vulnerable over and over again, right, in that the narrative, we have this idea that a narrative starts and continues, and you talked about it being dynamic, right? That we have to restart it over and over. And he does find his chosen family, as I've heard, you know, later in the movie. He finds people that are truly aligned. But how have you kind of kept, in the work you do, kept that level of vulnerability, particularly if you're dealing with something where it's like, it might be more of a technical disagreement. It might be more of a legal disagreement. You know what I mean? Like those sort of things. It might be more of a thing. It's like, it's just compliance. That's how this is what we're supposed to do. So how have you kind of handled that?
I really I appreciate the question around, and I'm going to hold it this way, thinking about the significance of our masks, the mask that Miles wears, the mask that Peter's wearing, the mask that I have to wear when dealing with compliance versus co-power. I say versus very intentionally because I don't believe you can have compliance and co-power at the same time. They're diametrically opposed forces. Compliance requires you to say, don't talk about the shared vision, look forward.
I'm sorry.
And co-power says, why aren't we looking at each other? And so I think about it this way. If co-power, which I really do agree with the shared definition we're holding in this conference, which is about honoring the past, anchoring the present, and momentum towards the future, I'm going to do it with Miles, Peter, and myself. I mean, for honoring the past and in my work, what I mean is myself and my work. I'll use Miles and then maybe myself. We'll leave Peter out of it for now. Sorry. I can only have so many thoughts. I'm limited. I'm not unlimited Spider-Man. Sorry for my nerds, they got that one. I think for Miles, in thinking about this, he honors the past because his past is technically Peter Parker, a little bit, and also his uncle, who's a criminal. Yeah. I mean, in the narrative of reality, he's honoring things that are diametrically opposed. He accepts that there are dualities and there are contradictions. And I don't even know if we don't get to hear from the narrative theatrical universe if that is a conscious knowing, but is that relevant? No. Miles Morales is honoring the past as he sees it. And so let me throw myself in there. So my business is called Cypher, right? And for me, that is about honoring the past. W.E.B. Du Bois specifically is the pinnacle of that, where that human being who decided to not only unveil himself from a reality that didn't fit him and remove a mask for himself, decided to unmask the reality of the black community through data and information, and decided that the U.S. Census of the 1800s that didn't capture information on black life was missing out on the narratives and reality of black people. And he wasn't thinking about the U.S. Census. He was thinking about the black people within his community. And how do we know that? Because in honoring the past, I didn't talk to Du Bois. He's gone. He's not here. But how do I know that is because, I know, right? Voicemails are crazy. But how do we know that is because the way that Du Bois, our first American data scientist, He visualized Black life through numbers and visualizations, through color and lines that told the story of a diaspora that wasn't even a word that was even in the circulation at the time. This person also helped fund things like the Harlem Theater projects and all kinds of things around the country that shape us today. And I bring that in about honoring the past because to me, Du Bois is the past, but who was Du Bois's past? Who was Du Bois's past? And I bring in honoring the past because that's where it always has to start. Miles honored the past by acknowledging his Uncle Aaron for being who he needed to be at the time, regardless of what the outcome was. He honored Peters, all the Peters, by continuing to wear this mask. Even though it didn't serve to protect his family, it served to just honor the legacy of what Spider-Man represented. So when I move myself in Cypher, I'm honoring the legacy of hoping to excavate the realities and the shared experiences and the responsibility of the superhero women and Black-owned businesses in my community and outside of my community that are not even measured and brought to the table. And when I say measured, I mean they're not held in excellence. They're not being evaluated. They're constantly being evaluated. But what happens when we honor those folks by not evaluating them, but excavating and amplifying what they work on as the reality that we should be pushing towards? So when I say pushing towards and anchoring in the present, what Cypher does is we take folks' past information, predominantly Black and women-owned businesses, and help them turn that into institutional knowledge to shape where they want that momentum to the future to go without the necessity to say, is that fundable? Is that in compliance with the state legislature? Is that in compliance with this and that? We avoid compliance because we're more interested in co-power. We say, well, who else would love to know how this information could help their mission? Well, who else is also wondering this question? Who isn't wondering this question, and why the heck not? And so in Miles Morales' example of anchoring the present, all he's ever doing in the whole film is asking questions. And if you have ever read the old comic book Spider-Man, he doesn't ask a lot of questions. He just tells jokes. Because he's living in a universe where he has no real problems. I mean, if you give it, all his problems are self-made. Peter Parker's problems are self-made. So in his dialogue in comic book, it's comedy because there are no real problems. Miles Morales is constantly computing real problems while solving real acrobatic problems at the same time. He asked in the beginning of the film, why'd y'all wait so long to recruit me? Which if they would have answered him with honesty, if it was really a community there, they would have gave him an honest response. They'd be like, well, we needed you to just stay here for a few times until you felt some trauma that made you feel more connected to us. Sounds like a cult. But that was what that's what the answer would have had to have been. They would have had to told him, we wanted you to stay here so you weren't in your universe protecting your people. We want you to go to Harvard with this scholarship so you can learn about how your people are impoverished so that maybe you can start a nonprofit that goes back to your community to then ask us for money to grow that nonprofit after you've experienced more trauma because you've been disconnected from the community and now you're coming back in and now you feel like an outsider. So when Miles Morales at the end of the film is pushed towards the universe that his DNA is attached to, the DNA that gave him powers, he's pushed into a universe of trauma and absence. So I say that to say momentum towards the future. What Cypher does with momentum to the future is that we recognize that helping Black and women-owned businesses bring in revenue is in itself an anomaly because 95% of all federal contracts go to the same legacy organizations. And because only 3% of Black women businesses make it to 2.5 years. That is a failure of systems, not a failure of people, community, and culture. And so me moving momentum to the future is unraveling that by changing the way we look at the data points, changing the way we think about the information we already hold from status quo, from that anchored present, and from that honored past, so that the momentum that we build is built around measurement, evaluation, metrics, amplification that we decide, not that someone prescribes to us with compliance metrics. So yeah, it's just something as simple as that. Like
It's a small summary.
you swing some webs, you save some people. You write some code, you give some people some money. That's all I said. But that's the past, present, and future put in a sentence. I mean, at the end of the day, what does he do? He puts on a mask, he swings some webs, and he saves some people. Cypher does the same thing as far as like we listen to people talk, we sling some code, and you get your money. And I think like when we're able to hold the pieces of honoring, anchoring, and momentum as simple while also being a series of long-form events, we're no longer thinking that everything has to be over time difficult. We let go of time. The Spider-Verse is like so cool to me because it's not about time. They like completely divorced the film from the idea that you need to care about who's 16 and who's 35 and who's 10 and who's been Spider-Man longer and shorter. It's simply just we're all Spider people. We're all holding these different universes, and no one's like, well, the oldest Spider-Man should be in charge, or the oldest Spider Society person. Miguel started this, but people are constantly like going behind Miguel's back and doing things because it's not a hierarchy. So sorry, I'm getting lost in the sauce.
We're getting a little too deep in his. We're not supposed to talk about future yet. That's the next panel. I'm kidding. No, but I think what you talked about, and I think what Asa, you wanted to talk about too, is, so again, stepping a little bit further back, and again taking this conversation about masks and about roles a little bit in a different direction. You talked about how, because Miles is in sort of a co-powered space, right? And because people in a co-powered space can, he's asked to do a lot very quickly, right? And he's able to work among a community of peers rather than a community of just mentorship and like one guy telling you what to do and then taking off, right? And he does a lot more. He's asked to grow up very quickly too, right? You talk about that a bit, right? And I want to kind of let you expand on that thought, because this idea that you have to go through this, you have to be tutored, you have to be this, you have to go through that here again, that part of the hero's journey, that we don't always have the luxury of doing that. And so I want to hear more about your thoughts on how co-powering lets you short circuit it, explore it in a new way.
I think that's the opportunity that we have in the present. When, I don't know how long ago it was, but not too far back, there was this report card of 50 years of the civil rights movement, and everyone did the math, the numbers of the visualization, and they're like, based on the resources that you have and, the way that we've, moved forward, you're all in the same spot. That was the narrative. And I remember looking at the table and I was like, no, actually, we're not. We have been transformed. There are more educated, more co-powering. The narrative isn't there to reflect that. The next part to that is that I've sat at a lot of tables, especially in the African-American culture, where people will say, we don't work together. And we'll be all collectively as a community at the table working together. And I'm like, so who told you that script? Because my business partner sitting here, Keelan. I'm like, who keeps saying this? Because we're in a room working together. So somewhere we have adopted these narratives, and we are proliferating them unconsciously, feeding it, while countering it in our actions. At TCIA, we work very deliberately and almost through our relationships, and not always as an organization. Sometimes it's just that we were co-powering this space. We don't wear our title. We don't say who we are. We just show up and contribute to a book club. I think part of the time that we have, especially in the African-American community, and maybe in others, is that our leaders, our former legacy leaders, honoring our past, fell into a script that we had to validate and get their approval in order to co-power forward, that we didn't go through the channels, you didn't march with me, I did this, I did that, and you're like, I can never do those things. You don't know hardship, you don't understand, and so they kept trying to put us in our place, while at the same time advocating for us to move forward. So I think that what you look at now is that technology, communities of practice, we can scale together. I mean, at our org, we brought new tablets, and then everyone was sitting down teaching each other how to use it, and it was actually a space I didn't know because I never used a tablet, so it was funny, good for me to sit back and watch. I was like, hey, y'all teaching me because I just bought them thinking it'd be a good idea. Our leaders never learned how to move out the way and to make the field bigger, and I think that right now that's what we have. We have the opportunity to honor our past but not be constrained by it, right? And anchor to the reality of the present and explode into the future. And I think that that's what we are.
Well, I want to push on that a little bit too, because I want to push on that a little bit because you also, when we were talking in the last panel, you were also talking about, I want to play with the verb, or whether it's like to get out of the way, right? Because you talked about our ancestors in the first panel and how the idea is not to remove, right? The idea is to make space. But there is a tension there, and I think we're going to talk about tension in the next panel too, right? There's a tension. Like we talked about friction being the watchword of some of this work. It comes with the territory.
Let me rephrase that before people take that literally. There's a system of paternalism that is in place that says if you didn't come through these doors, you're technically not sanctioned. We're going to stack the table with that.
Like
right?
being a technologist.
Yes,
Like
in a sense. So
who's-
there's a group. Yeah, there's a group who's a technologist, and we had this conversation, Gabe. And to us, everyone's a technologist because we're all interacting with technology at a certain point of entry, and we're all being shaped by it, and we're influencing it. So today, to say that that's an elite group of people, that's gone. There are some who are on the stratosphere of the AI space, but that is gone. We're all being shaped, and we're all co-powering it. What I should say is that there's a point in the leadership theory called path goal theory, right? Where you facilitate. If I came before you, then I should be facilitating and removing obstacles at a certain point to help you move forward. I'm not necessarily out the way, but I'm not the gatekeeper constraining you until you are in compliance with my methodology or my viewpoint. And I think that that's the thing that needs to get out the way. It's not the leaders. It's the mindset of compliance, to Robert's point, and conformity in order for us to sanction you that you have the right to be at this table. And I think that that's where there's a lot of tension. Depending on who's in the room, there's a lot of legacy organizations who will say, why aren't we at this table? And we need to cash in here. And we need to figure out how to massage that tension out and let those who are equipped, to your point, and at the speed of light, and enable them to have the future. And a lot of times what we do at TCIA, we see ourselves as the enablers, not necessarily the leaders. We just want to build the road for you to get where you need to go. Tell us what you need.
And that's sort of the essence of power building, right? As you see it, is this sort of the real human elements of building and acknowledging where people are, where they're coming from. And I know we've been talking, lots of people have been talking a lot. It's been a great conversation, but I also want to give people time to reflect on the ideas too. And I think where I'd like to end us is sort of this fundamentally different relationship to, I'll call it masks, but it's masks and roles. Like the idea of, are you a mentor? Are you a technologist? Are you an advocate? Are you a business owner? And like you've talked about this a lot, Robert, is in this idea of, and I know we had a great conversation with Marika too about this idea of which masks you wear, what they allow you to do, but also what happens when you get stuck wearing one. I think that's what you were talking about, is when you get stuck in a role, right? And it takes on sort of rigid dimensions, right? Which, again, if we talk about Spider-Man, it's, Miguel, right? He's one of the characters he's caught in that. He's caught in his own, trying to exercise his own will and control the world through this mode of action, being a superhero, being more powerful. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you for some sort of final or nearly final thoughts about, you said that wearing roles, inhabiting things is not necessarily good or bad, right? It is sort of, it's something we need to, like we say, anchored in the present, it's something we need to acknowledge about where we are. And rather than say we are stuck in these fixed roles of we have going back to the hero's journey, we have a mentor, we have a person who's on a journey, and recognizing that like we're not always in our own, we're playing different roles, different places. We're not going to be in one mode. And so you talked a lot about how you have found power, not just in the different masks, but in the moment of switching, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. For me, I'm going to do this as concisely as I can, which is going to be really impressive, I think. I'm impressed with myself already. No, I say that because I'm going to lead with something that I wanted to mention earlier. Miles finds power and comfort in stepping into power. And I say that because when we talk about masks and being comfortable with masks or not being comfortable with masks and good and bad masks, and you took your mask off or mask off, mask on, I really feel like we're talking about power, and on the opposite side of power, the other side of the coin of power is oppression. And I'm going to really draw from people who are far more experts in these spaces than I am, Audre Lorde and Ella Baker. Audre Lorde has a great essay, and I almost said long-form poem, on there's no hierarchy of oppression, right? And in order to see yourself part of a hierarchy of oppression, you have to accept that you have power. And then I think about Ella Baker saying strong people don't need strong leaders. And so when we come back to the idea, when you hold those two quotes from those folks who really understood the marches from a perspective that I cannot hold in this day and time, but I can remix and reimagine the power that comes in those terms, I think about peer mentoring. And I think about the way I was able to mentor kids in Rikers versus kids in D.C., in Southeast versus kids at Columbia University versus grown adults who are selling millions of dollars of technology. I really interrogated my responsibility as a peer mentor. And so there are three words I'm holding: responsibility, that I said in 2 words, and then peer and mentor. And so when I think about mentor, it's a verb, mentoring. So if there's no action involved, I'm not a mentor, is how I first think about it. And that goes into my responsibility as a mentor. I can respond by acknowledging the duration in which I can give to a person, thing, or movement. I can respond by offering out loud, transparently, what I can give you right now or in the future, or what I can't give you. And I can respond by being clear about what my long-term expectations or hopes are for this responsible partnership, this mentorship, this peer mentorship. And when I say ability, that's where co-power becomes real. And that's where peering in and peering out, going back to that word peer, is important. Peering in is a non-permanent state. So when we're wearing our masks, too often we think about our titles, our masks, as these rigid identities, when in reality, the mask is just an expression of the verb. Your ability to peer into a relationship and your ability to peer out of that relationship and look around is the only way you can mentor someone. Because when you're in mentorship, you're in an interpersonal relationship with one other. And all of a sudden, they're asking you to be more than one other to them. And the only way you can do that is when you aren't holding the pressure, responsibility, and the power that comes with the assumption of that you hold knowledge, that you're smart, as Azam said, that you have these things already known, that I alone can save us. When you let go of the title and the mask and you really think about your responsibility, how long can I show up for this person? All those people left Miles Morales behind and never thought about the duration they could be a mentor to him. And thus that caused cleavages in his real life where he was not doing school right and not showing up for his family. That's why he wasn't showing up for his family. It wasn't because he was Spider-Man. It was because the people who were supposed to be his mentors abandoned him and only came back to him when they needed something from him. Not the other way around, not when they could offer something to him. So when we talk about this idea of, oh, you're wearing masks, oh, you're code switching, you're two-faced, oh, you're not really part of a community, oh, you're an imposter syndrome candidate. First of all, imposter syndrome was invented by 2 white women in the 70s who wanted to fit into psychology. So just unpack that. But when you think about this idea of all these other things you get thrown at you to tell you the pathology of how you exist, none of that has to do with action. So what is your responsibility? That's how you move through these masks. You can have 1,000 masks in your back pocket, but if I put a mask on, I go into a grocery store and I take some cash out, I'm a thief. But if I go into the grocery store and web up the thief, I'm a superhero. It's the same mask. It's the responsibility you bring to the table and the context of that response. Because if I web someone up in a black church, I'm about to get jumped on by all the aunties because I'm disrupting a very powerful honoring of the past. I'm disrupting the anchoring to the present that we are all in community in this moment, and I'm disrupting their ability to tell their community what they want for the future as a spiritual community because I came in with my mask and my thought about how I can be helpful and how I can save everyone. So I think about it that way, where the real ability is always about understanding the verbal actions you're bringing to the table, and that defines your symbolism as a hero or as a person or as a bystander, as a bearer of witnesses. Too often, we think either we're the hero or the victim, and not enough times do we ask ourselves, how do we become better witness bearers and space holders? And so that's where I'll land.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can't build on the church bit, though. Don't talk about that
Oh,
one.
I won't touch that one. That's in a higher realm. There's something that, a lot of things you said that resonate that I think are anti-patterns in this space. Doing. Critics criticize. When you shift to critic mode, you do not do. You become an expert at tear down and destroy, and you forget about the emotional wake that you leave behind. And it's an ego trip to criticize. I'm criticizing right now critics, just to be clear, all right? And you can get locked into that and feel a sense of empowerment, of destruction, and you have no way to rectify it, though. You can't rectify. You can't repair what you just did. You can't rebuild it. The second part of co-powering, and you have to, I'm gonna pause, you have to make sure you are conscious of that shift. When you shift to the critic, as if you are the expert. When someone is coming from an insecure position, the notion of power is harmful when they push it out. Because the moment that they perceive that they're going to lose it, they forget the other mask of compassion, morality. They forget the empathy because they're trying to hold on to something. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to hold on to the sense of whatever that perceived power was. And we have a lot of space we have to hold in order to try to get to a better place with that. The mask is sometimes the internal narratives that we're carrying that people never see. The mask is who we are. That's a part of element of intelligence, the fact that we can contextually shift real time. You know, technically speaking, the only thing that can make us extinct is us because everything else goes extinct. We have the ability to adapt, but we also have the ability to have disregard for that. And that's why I say our smarts become the harmful mask that holds us in place to patterns, anti-patterns that erode community, that prevent us from accepting technical assistance, and that makes us, and I'm gonna drop it on this one, more verbose than we need to be. I'm not speaking up here. I want to say that. In here, when there's another conversation going on in here, and we are not actually receiving anything, when I am willing to defend before I can receive, before I can process, before I can align, before I can even say what I think I heard, I am automatically shutting you down, so you have to fight to breathe. There's too many tables we sit at where that happens every day. I don't care if you got a PhD. If you're sitting in here, you've been at a table somewhere where you're trying to express something, and before you can even, you have to contend with all the narratives in here about whether or not what you have to say is important, whether or not it's going to be received, whether or not that microaggression you just saw in somebody's face. We are interpreting data points all day long. And so the real mask is that sometimes we just have to call it out. What did I just see? I'm sorry, what was that expression? In order to start, in a good way, getting the change that we need to see. It is a verb, and there's compassion and mercy in how we do it.
Thanks so much. So I want to wrap us a little bit early because I think we need to give people time to breathe and reset, but also because I want to invite people, because what I heard from both of you too was that the roles, we call them masks in the worksheet, right? But the people use them for different things. Some of them are for defense, some of them are because of certain things we need to do. They free you to do something. They also prevent you from doing something. They keep certain things hidden. They reveal certain things. And I wanted to invite kind of people, as you were talking about that, to sort of, as you're looking at that worksheet, to sort of start thinking about not necessarily this mentor-mentee role in the hero's journey, but really more about the masks. You know, we're talking about who's in the world, who's in your ecosystem, what masks they wear, but also kind of starting to think about why, right? What does it do for you, for them? What does it take? What does it give, right? Because like you said, part of this is, like you said too, it's a two-way street. Sometimes it provides more, provides freedom. Sometimes it conceals certain things, right? And like you said, people are going to show up like that, right? People are going to continue to show up like that. And so rather than looking at these stories as like a simplified, simple narrative, starting to interrogate the different valences that everybody carries with them, right? The different identities people carry with them that we carry with ourselves too, and seeing when can I maybe, when do I have enough trust to be vulnerable? Right? When can I, like, what is required to actually be vulnerable with certain masks? And what are masks you keep on or keep off, right? What are roles you don't play? And so I wanted to leave it like that and kind of let you have a final thought, but then also invite people to start looking at as you look at the worksheet and as you look at the rest of the day, to sort of think through those pieces too, of like showing up in different places, showing up in different ways, right? And, you know, taking a critical eye towards that too.
So that's an important aspect of it. And I'm trying to think of, I can see his face. He's an economist at the University of Minnesota. And Marika and I were having a conversation with him, and I cannot think of his last name right now to save my life. I'm going to get off the stage and remember him. And he said something that was profound and everything. And I was just like, wow, that's really dope. And then he's like, oh, no, that wasn't me. I'm quoting somebody else. That's their work, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, oh, man, that's really dope. He said, no, that's just intellectual humility. I was like, what? He said, yeah, I don't need to act like I did it all and took credit for it all. And today, we are so either afraid of someone taking credit for what we do and pulling our mask, or we're taking, oh, Dr. Myers. Yes, thank you, Dr. Myers. And I was just like, intellectual humility. I was like, there should be emotional humility because everyone can't be insecure. Then no one can be secure. I was like, there needs to be a sense of the humility of saying, yes, I've worked with that, but I'm not an expert in that. Yes, I support that, but I'm open to learning about that. And being able to stop putting, especially on young people, that they're supposed to know things that they don't have no contextual experience to translate into reality what it means, and give them the experience to actually stumble through and to gain the experience that the way we got it. So I think that that's the real part of this journey, is enabling experimentation again, and sampling with a safety net that you don't have to be the illusion of perfection, of flawlessness, but the perfection of learning from your experiences and continuing to co-power that forward and then transferring that to the group. And I think that that's one of the joys of this conversation, is how we can reconnect to that and offer technical assistance and support and build partnerships that allow us to co-power effectively. So that's it.
Thank you so much. You have anything to add before we wrap?
Yes, just that I want to hold two different parallels of the future that I've lived through, where I saw a big problem in my community, and I tried to talk to an institution that had big hands to hold that problem, and I saw them bury the problem in procedure and compliance and procedure, and one solution fit all, or one lack of solution fit all narrative that really just, as was said up here over and over again, it's such a big problem, such a big challenge, we don't have enough hands to cover it all. How often are we hearing that from the biggest budgets in our country, telling us it's such a big problem, we need bigger language, we need large language models, we need big data. All these things are superlatives and also relative. So first of all, it's all marketing is what I'm saying. But to answer that, for real, it wasn't until I really thought about what it means to me to be an Afrofuturist, and knowing that I'm not the first one to do that, even though I wish I was, because I'd be really cool. It was looking back. Oh, man, thank you, man. That's what I needed today. It's Friday. But as an Afrofuturist, I realized I needed to have small conversations, deep conversations, and sustained conversations, instead of trying to say I need to do a landscape analysis of the whole country to figure out what the problem and the solutions will be. And I say that because we mentioned emergent strategies up here earlier. I didn't, but I say we because we are a we now. And my favorite quote, because it's the last quote I read from the book on fractional facilitation, was that often when we see a big problem, we feel we're supposed to act. And we're always looking to figure out, how do we act? How do we punch back, right? Or counterpunch. And what we really need to be seeking is deep relationship. And I think that part is what I want to leave with on that thought, is that, too often in these conversations, when we have a pandemic, or we have a local endemic, or we have a sustained problematic situation even within our households, we think we're supposed to find an action, and if that action doesn't work one time, we're done. But not enough time do we actually spend talking to our small groups, our small communities, and deepening our relationship with them by saying, yo, I don't really know what this is. It's killing me. I don't know if I'm alone, but brother, can you help me? Brother, can you help me? Sister, can you help me? Hey, you're wearing a T-shirt that looks like something I like, and I haven't been to that concert in a while. Why'd you go to that? By deepening our relationships, by not questioning the questions that ask us to connect, but questioning the questions that ask us to silo, the ones that say that, well, am I the authority? Well, am I the one who should be asking this? Well, is this the room for that? By not doing that work, but instead saying, well, why don't I ask him why his name is spelled slightly different than my name, but we got the same name? Me and Azam have the same name, but I say Avim, he says Azam. So why, instead of being like, oh, it sucks, just being like, let's have a deeper, smaller conversation. No, but really, I could be like, well, you're wrong. That's not how you say it. But instead, I'm like, you shared with me yesterday in passing in less than 2 seconds, you shared with something about what your name represents in a verbal sense, that mine represents something different in a verbal sense. For me, it means great. For you, you said something else. Do you remember what it was? Modest. So for me to now hold that duality is everything, and that came from small conversation, from deepening relationship, and that's where I want to put it.
All right, awesome. Robert, thank you both. Thank you so much. And we're going to get off the stage before they bring out the crooks. So thank you all.